Hello, souls and demons. What would you do if you forgot how to dream? Today's story is My Town Forgot How to Dream, written by Deify. So you know the drill. Sit back, grip your seats, and just enjoy. I don't sleep. I hate those little slices of death. Walter Reich. As I stood frozen in place, thoughts dwelling in my mind about the inevitable choice I had to make, I knew that choice had to be made soon. With my right hand gently grasping my chin in thought, I knew my next decision was going to impact the next few minutes of my life in a way I could not explain to someone who wouldn't understand. I looked up slowly. My choice was made. You know what? Let's go ahead and throw both on there, I said with a grin. Both mayo and mustard, sir? The sandwich shop employee inquired. Yeah, my doctor says I need to bring my cholesterol down, but that sandwich is looking pretty sexy, I replied as I winked at the cute girl making my sandwich. She shook her head with a smile and resumed her work on my order. I collected my meal and found the most remote corner I could to resume my studies. A recent spike in mental illness cases brought me back to my small hometown I was raised in. At the age of 20, I received an offer for an internship that was far too good to pass up. I quickly accepted and made my way to New York City, where I could become the lead practitioner in the field of onerology over the preceding 2 decades. An onerologist is, to give a basic explanation, a dream doctor. I work in a branch of neuropsychology that specifically studies REM sleep and its correlation between dreams and the functions of the brain. My theories on casual dreams, nightmares, and even sleep paralysis have been studied worldwide, and as a result, the head of the local college requested me specifically. Normally, I would not take a case like this and send one of my interns to research, but it was a chance to reconnect with my old town and what family I had left here. You may be asking yourself, why would a dream doctor be sent to investigate a surge of mental illnesses? Without going into too many long medical terms or scientific details, a recent discovery by a local doctor discovered strange activity in the hippocampus, signifying the patient's dreams may have something to do with their psychosis. His findings were what ultimately prompted me to make my journey back home, as dreams and nightmares have a significant effect on the human psyche. Mind if I join you? A voice said from above me. I lifted my head out of the stack of files I was studying case by case for the last several hours. Please do, I replied, noticing it was the college chancellor. I could use a distraction. I've been staring at these papers for so long I feel like my eyes are going to melt out of their sockets. Well, we can't have that. In truth, all we really need is your brain, though, the chancellor said jokingly. I smiled and, as if instinctual, I began skimming the case I was currently trying to wrap my head around, forgetting about my need for that little distraction. Any luck? He asked with a more stern tone. I shook my head and let out an irritated exhale. Nope, I can't find a single commonality in any of these cases aside from the symptoms themselves. We may actually have a brand new undocumented form of psychosis on our hands, I replied, rubbing my forehead in frustration. Well, I might have something for you, and someone you might want to talk to, the chancellor offered with the same sternness in his voice. Yeah? I said, this time with an equally irritating inhale. It's a bit of an unlikely source, but a young upstarting freshman may have found one commonality you might be interested in, he said. What would that be? I said as I began organizing the mess of papers into their folders. I'll let him explain it to you. Not exactly my area of expertise, and I'm pretty sure I'd explain it wrong, he explained in a more giggly voice. I nodded and finished packing up my research along with the half-eaten sandwich I'd all but forgotten about, thanks to my studies. As we approached the school campus, an unusual scene caught our eyes. The chancellor hurriedly parked the car and ran to a group of college students who had gathered in a large group. I trailed behind him slightly as we began to see and hear what was going on. "Get them away! Get them away! The eyes! They won't stop staring. I can't. No!" A frightened student yelled as she frantically flailed on the ground. Young lady, what's wrong?" The Chancellor yelled, grabbing both her arms to stop her violent outburst. It was then I noticed campus police running over to assist. The Chancellor had managed to stop the student from flailing as she fell silent, tears rolling down her face. "The eyes. They're everywhere. I can't. No," she said in a whimper as she clutched the Chancellor's arms, burying her face into his shoulder. He looked up at me with a look of shock. The most common symptom of what was happening in this town was hallucinations. It seemed we had another case. Campus police and EMTs were able to bring her to the adequate medical facility to help her, or at least attempt to. After the frightening scene was well in hand, we made our way to our destination. Now that I had a chance to walk among other people instead of wrapped up in my studies, I noticed something concerning. The majority of students, teachers, and school personnel seemed unwell. Many of them were equipped with baggy eyelids, and they seemed to lazily lurch forward to their next class. Several of the students looked pale as if they hadn't seen the sun in months. All with frumpy postures as if they either just woke up or never slept at all. If there wasn't a mental health concern going around, I would have just blamed it on late-night studies for exams. I took a mental note of what I was seeing as we approached the computer lab. Twin computer screens looked back at me in the reflection of his thick glasses. The young man was intently gazed forward into his research. If he moved any closer to the screen, he probably would have knocked his monitor to the floor. "Son, this is the scientist I told you about," the Chancellor said, attempting to get the young man's attention. "Yeah, huh?" he replied with his eyes darting back and forth at the webpage in front of him. I looked at the Chancellor, annoyed at the apathy this kid was showing. He shot back a grin as if he was expecting that response and amused by the look I was giving him. "Would you care to explain to him what you told me?" he said, not removing the grin. An awkward silence filled the room for several seconds, followed by a quick, nasally retort. "This is not indicative of all reported cases, but I did find common grounds in a cluster of reported illnesses," he blurted in one hurried breath. "Some, not all, have reported vicious nightmares." That doesn't seem to be a commonality if only some have nightmares. "It sounds pretty normal, to be honest," I replied, about ready to give up on this kid. He didn't respond. He continued typing and hastily clicked the mouse. "Son, tell him the important part," the Chancellor demanded. The young man halted the movement of his mouse and slowly met his eyes with mine. They're all having the same nightmare. To the letter," he said, almost as if he was telling a spooky campfire story. I looked towards the Chancellor in confusion. His eyebrows lifted as he nodded his head. I opened my mouth to question the kid further. I was interrupted by a loud scream emanating from the school hallway. The two of us ran towards the sound with the young man gazing over the top of the monitor, still not moving from his seat. As we exited the classroom, more screams were heard with students all gazing in the same direction. We did the same. A young lady was running down the hallway towards us. Her screams echoed through the corridor as she ran. We moved to intercept, but we were met with another sight. The silhouette of a male student appeared at the end of the sun-glistened hallway. He was running towards the poor girl in a sprint, holding what appeared to be a stick or pole over his head as he charged. A clunk was heard as the female student tripped and landed hard on the ground, immediately turning around and frantically sliding back in terror. A group of students and teachers, including ourselves, moved to stop the male student. "I'm going to kill you! Damn it! Damn it! You're dead! You're dead!" He screamed in rage as we tried desperately to subdue him. campus police were quick to the scene and yelled for the group to clear away as they wrestled the student down. A loud snapping noise was heard, followed by sounds of electricity. They had tased the enraged young man. The taser had zero effect. With the police backed away to make room for the taser, the student began jabbing the weapon at every angle. His face was blood red with rage as he grit his teeth. His hands gripped the weapon, which seemed to be a broken broom handle he sharpened to a point. With the sounds of electricity still echoing in the air, the enraged man was tackled from behind by an officer. They finally subdue him as two teachers escorted the frightened young girl from the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" the chancellor yelped as he ran his hand through his hair. I slowly looked around at the crowd that had gathered. Sluggish, tired-looking faces lazily watched as the police hauled off the would-be attacker. As they left, the group dispersed in silence as they continued their day, almost unaffected by what just happened. I know the term zombie is thrown around a lot to describe someone who is overworked and exhausted, but that term could not be more accurate here. I had to get to the bottom of this. This was no normal psychosis. My thoughts were filled with speculations as I drove to my next destination. The 10-minute drive seemed like 10 hours as thoughts of the horrifying cases I was studying occupied my entire thought process. Every case had reported hallucinations. What was causing them and why is everyone affected? All within a small window of time. As I approached my destination, my thoughts were quickly interrupted. A tight grasp was felt around my neck. I gasped for air as I attempted to keep control of the vehicle. The grip sent an intense pain through the muscles of my neck as I tried to fight off the attacker. In a fright, I glared towards the rearview mirror at who was attacking me. It was the Chancellor. A devious grin glared back at me as I lost control of the wheel. The car broke into a spin as I was now using both hands to attempt to pull his increasingly strong grip from my throat. He wouldn't budge. The strength displayed was impossible. As I retched in pain and slowly accepted my defeat, the car came to a halt with the sound of screeching tires coming to an end. An empty quietness filled the air as I opened my clenched eyes. As I rubbed away the tears, I jumped forward and turned the seat back. No one. The empty back seat was all I could stare at as I rubbed my neck, no longer in pain. "Oh my God," I uttered under my breath at what I just realized. I am not immune to what's happening here. Did I just have my own hallucination? My own psychosis? I turned to peer out my windshield. I was facing the wrong direction into oncoming traffic. Luckily, an empty road was in front of me. I slowly pressed the gas pedal to complete my trip. As I gazed into my mirror once again to an empty back seat, as I stared, I caught a glimpse of two baggy eyes paired with a pale complexion. I stared in disbelief as I realized I was succumbing to the same illness as the rest of the town. As I walked through the hospital hallways, I was met with more unusual sights and sounds. Screaming was heard in one room with hospital staff restraining a patient. One particular receptionist was angrily typing on her keyboard between yanks of her hair. I passed by a team of doctors who were consoling a patient who was sitting in the hallway, crying. I passed by another room, and as I peered into the small window, I could see a man in a hospital robe, walking into a wall. What I mean is, he would slam front first into the wall, back up, and repeat, over and over again. Now that I'm seeing where these cases are being treated, I realized the severity of what was happening to these people and possibly myself. "It's so good to see you, sir," the lead doctor said while hastily shaking my hand. "Thank you. This is far more dire than I first realized, doctor. What do you have for me?" I stated, wanting to skip the usual formalities. "Next to nothing, I'm afraid." His glazed eyes looked to me in exhaustion. "I'm nearly working with a skeleton crew due to sick staff, and more cases keep filling my plate." As he spoke, he pointed towards a glass window that showed us another room. A patient was sleeping soundly in her hospital bed. Health monitors and sensors were attached to her forehead and temples. It's as if everyone in town is suffering from sleep deprivation, but all reported cases have shown the patients are receiving adequate amount of sleep. The doctor continued his report. I've noticed the same thing around town and in myself, I said, not wanting to admit the latter portion. The doctor turned his gaze towards me. I do have to admit, I haven't been feeling like myself lately. This isn't something that's spurred by one event. It's not passed on from person to person. And it's not something that's just in the air. This is a legitimate phenomena. Do you have a live read of her brain functions? I asked, attempting to break the tone. With a spin of his chair, the doctor stood up and tapped two separate monitors. The left monitor had a familiar sight with statistics on brain activity. The right-hand monitor showed a visual representation of the patient's brain. Separate colors differentiating each activity produced. After a quick glimpse of the monitor and brain activity, I snapped my head to the direction of the patient who was soundly sleeping. An equally quick snap back to the monitor was followed. How long has she been asleep, Doc? I said in a worried tone. Roughly 3 hours now, he answered. Don't worry, no sedation. It's 100% natural. This isn't right, I interrupted. The amount of brain activity shown here is way too slow for someone this deep into sleep. I'm afraid I'm not too well versed on brain activity during sleep, sir. Shouldn't the brain shut down while sleeping? He said with an innocent yet naive tone. Quite the opposite, I replied, not taking my gaze away from the screen. Brain activity is the most active when we sleep. This chart should be lit up. What's your hypothesis? The doctor asked, confused. With my hand on my chin, I paced the room for several seconds. I had to piece this puzzle together. I stopped in my tracks as I looked up. Doctor, it's not sleep deprivation that's affecting the town. It's dream deprivation, I said confidently. Sir? The doctor said, confused but intent on my words. People are showing signs for lack of sleep, but the inherent issue is lack of dreaming. Reaching REM sleep to dream, I said, once again pacing the room. I continued. Fatigue, irritability, hallucinations are all signs of dream deprivation, but what's causing it? The doctor neglected to answer, instead turning his head to look at a sleeping patient with a worried scowl. Wait. There were nightmares reported too. How can that be if we're all suffering from... I stopped my words at realizing what the real important question was. Doctor, I barked as he snapped his head towards me at the sudden surprise. It was reported that patients who were having nightmares all had the same dream. Is this correct? Without a word, he nodded and motioned for me to follow him. More and more odd sights and sounds were present as we made our way to his office. A poor old man was yelling at staff members to get down and cover fire. PTSD? I asked the doctor. He shook his head. Not until last week. We arrived at his office and he immediately moved to open his filing cabinet. He handed me a file with several pieces of crumpled sheets of paper, all with drawings on them. These are illustrations each patient drew representing their nightmares, he said in the most confident tone I'd heard from him yet. I studied the artwork presented in front of me. They were all different yet similar. Crudely drawn images of walls and corridors. The scenes in each picture seemed oddly familiar. Each drawing was so sloppily done, it was difficult to make anything out, but that same theme was consistent in each. One drawing stood out. This one was much neater and understandable. It was almost artistic in its work. More dark corridors and decrepit walls filled the page with one addition. A set of tracks and an old, broken train. I recognized the logo on the top of the train. This was the old subway system that it was abandoned during its construction when I was a child. I remember it so vividly because news broke out of an accident at the station. 5 workers were killed and lawsuits put construction on hold, and inevitably, the project was stopped. Had they reopened the subway during my absence? A quick internet search proved this was not the case. How could all of these disturbed people have such a strong recollection of a place so old? And from the looks of the drawings, forgotten. The stranger part being, why the few people who were dreaming were having only nightmares? "Doctor," I yelled, continuing to stare at the drawing. "Is there anything you could tell me about these patients? How they might be different from the others who aren't dreaming?" The doctor put his head down to think. A pondering look filled his face as he looked back up to me. "Yes, sir, it wasn't a concern until you mentioned the dream deprivation. Every one of these patients suffer from post-dormital paralysis." "Sleep paralysis?" I said with an aura of enlightenment behind my words. He nodded his head slowly. What could that mean? I didn't answer immediately as I slowly reached for the door. I paused briefly to gaze back at the doctor over my shoulder. "Keep doing what you can. I'm going to look into something," I said as I opened the door. The day was ending fast, and I wasn't sure how much longer these poor people could last. More and more dull eyes were seen while I walked as doctors, nurses, and patients alike showed a depressing lump of what used to be a human. More than once, I saw someone bump into a doorway entering a room, slamming headfirst into a bare wall, and more terrified, frightened people lined the hallway in their rooms. The screams and slams coming from the echoed hallways were becoming unbearable. I stopped, almost falling forward at a new sight of terror. A pair of high heels were kicking from underneath a pile of police officers. They were attempting to restrain her as I pressed my back against the wall, attempting to slide around the mess in front of me. I gasped at what I saw next. Without a thought, I cupped my mouth with both hands at the side of a dead patient, in hospital robes, lying dead on the cold floor, a pen jutting out of his neck. His throat was mangled. It clearly wasn't one stab. It was a vicious attack. More shock arrived as I saw the assailant the police were trying to control. It was the irritable receptionist I saw when I arrived. She wasn't screaming or yelling. She was growling, as if possessed by some sort of wild animal. I made my way around the scene and left, awkwardly slamming my shoulder into the doorframe. I stood in my hotel room, peering out of my window, not knowing what to do for my town. My request for a great view when I checked in turned out to be nothing I ended up wanting. Many people were seen wandering the streets, some talking to themselves, some yanking their hair, some hurtled down in fright. Despite the almost apocalyptic mess that was displayed in front of me, I felt a sense of safety being in my room at the top floor. I gazed down towards the immaculate drawing I had managed to borrow from the inept doctor. The longer I looked, the more I recognized from my childhood. This was too accurate. I don't know why these people were dreaming of this place and why I had such a vivid recollection of that childhood memory, but I had to find out. A creaking sound was heard from behind me. I snapped around quickly, feeling the presence of someone in my room. I walked through my hotel room, checking every corner for what I just heard. Every time I checked one spot, more creaking was heard in another. I knew someone was there. I could feel it. I resigned my efforts to locate the source of the sound. I set the patient's drawing on my nightstand and began to undo my tie. More creaking, this time in all four corners of the room. It was becoming louder. What was happening? Suddenly, all four walls began moving towards me. I panicked, screaming out loud as I watched four bare walls slowly creak towards me. One wall wasn't as bare, however. The window I had felt so safe from may be my only way out. I slammed my body against the window in a panic and began feeling for the lock. There was none. My panic cries were quickly stopped as I looked outside. Dozens and dozens of the townspeople were staring at me. The pale gazes sent a fright through me I had no clue could be felt. "What do you want?" I screamed as the window pane echoed my cry back to me. Go away, damn it, go away! I cowered to the ground and covered my ears as the creaking walls became unbearably loud. Quietness. I slowly pulled my hands from my ears and scanned the room. Everything was normal. Pictures on the walls, furniture in place, and no collapsing walls. My attention darted out of the window. The town was no longer staring at me. They were back to their disturbing behavior, which, is funny to say, was a relief. I looked down at my end table. The drawing looked back at me in an almost beckoning way. I quickly grabbed the picture and ran out the door. I knew what I had to do. Frozen as fear is more real to me, now more than ever, as I stood staring at it. The entrance to the old abandoned subway system, boarded up with several notes warning about making entry. I wasn't planning on heeding those warnings. I began pulling on the large slab of wood covering the entrance, only managing to pull a piece off at a time. This was going to take a while, but I could feel myself slipping into the madness as I swore I heard voices and footsteps behind me. Glimpsing back, there was of course nothing. I stopped my demolition project as I noticed something at the far end of the building. A glimmer of a solid metal surface was emanating with a reflection of moonlight. As I approached it slowly, down a very short flight of stairs was a door. It was a maintenance door. I didn't know what to expect as I reached for the doorknob, but I opened it. It wasn't locked. As I walked through the dark passageways into the darkness and the depths of this place, I felt a sense of dread as if I was unwelcome here. I lit up the hallways with the light on my cell phone and peered into the room after room as I passed. Most were empty, some cluttered with junk. "Damn!" I exclaimed as I approached it. An old, beat-up tram was slightly tilted off the track as I entered the large subway station. The entire place was colored in a rusty tan color with dirt and cobwebs strewn all over. Am I the first to visit this place since the incident? I walked the room for several minutes, gazing at the wonders in front of me. The darkness of the room was interrupted by a flicker of red. I saw it from the corner of my eye as I quickly turned to look. Flickers of red lined the walls inside of what appeared to be a sewer grate. I turned off my phone's light and moved towards the sewer entrance. I couldn't see a thing as I moved my head at different angles peering down the small passageway. I came all this way, should I go further? My adrenaline was at an all-time high and possibly the only reason for doing what I did. I grasped either side of the grate and pulled. It was remarkably easy to remove. It was almost impossible to move as I squeezed myself further and further into the small sewer entrance. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally made it to an open area. Another grate met me as if I was in a cage. This cage, though, led to a larger area. Flickers of a fire lit up the walls as I came to realize someone was down here. Possibly a homeless person? I pulled myself slightly further to look into the room. There he sat, crouched down by the fire. The light from the flames only gave me a silhouette of a man in what appeared to be a long coat, or possibly robes. He stayed, crouched at the fire, quiet, eerily quiet. After a couple of minutes, he began to speak, very low and nearly inaudible. I tried to listen closely but was disappointed that he wasn't speaking English. I had no clue what language it was, but his words became louder and louder as he continued. His inflection almost became a chant. I backed up in fright as he quickly extended his right arm out. He was holding a curved knife. He stopped chanting. Did he hear me? Slowly, his left arm extended outwards. A small tree branch was all I could make out in the silhouette. He slowly placed the branch on the fire. I was almost mesmerized by what seemed to be a ritual. The man began standing up as he lifted both hands in the air. I winced in disgust as he sliced the palm of his own hand. He proceeded to let the blood drip onto the fire. Slowly, with head down, he walked away. I waited several minutes until I could no longer hear the crunching of his footsteps. I grasped my hand on the bars in front of me. They wiggled loose just as easily. I dropped to the floor much louder than expected as I ducked instinctively. He was gone. I placed the grate on the ground and began examining my surroundings. The fire was still lit as I could see the branch, covered in berries, burning in the flames. Further into the room, I saw something. A statue. It was small, about the size of a small dog. This was not man's best friend. This cat seemed to have a cat-like body and claws, tusks and a snout similar to an elephant, fur covering its body and seemingly engulfed in golden flames. Coins and jewelry were underneath the statue in a small bowl. There was writing engraved on a place underneath it. It was an Asian language. Now I wish I hadn't wasted all that time failing Spanish class. A sharp pain struck me fast as the side of my neck burned in pain. I grabbed my neck quickly and spun around. The dark form tackled me to the ground. He began yelling in the unknown language in rage as I tried fighting him off. He was much stronger than me. I could barely resist. For some reason during the struggle, even though I didn't understand him, he kept repeating the same words. Fukushu and Raku were the only two I could easily make out as his chants continued. As I felt myself being more and more overpowered, a dizziness began to set in as I slowly backed out. The last thing I remember is the face. An angry face of an Asian man. Red flickers from the flames lit him up almost as if I was in hell. I remember the dream I had vividly. I don't usually remember dreams at all, but this one will be with me forever. The empty old train in the station was directly in front of me. I looked down at my feet to notice I was off the ground. A quick look above me saw a rusty chain hanging from the wall. I felt my neck where the man had hurt me. Chains. The chain was around my neck and I was hanging. No pain, no death. I was not alone. I looked around at dozens upon dozens more people, all in the same predicament. Some were crying. I could almost hear their teardrops hit the ground as the silence was deafening. A growling was heard from the darkness down the train tunnel. No one moved. They continued their sobs. 2 large blue lights appeared in the black tunnel. They sat for several seconds. They moved closer. A misty form began to appear, faster than I could keep up with. It jolted into the room towards a grouping of people. It was large, bigger than the train itself. It flew, defying gravity with its blue, almost silky-looking vapor. Its tail whipped back and forth as I witnessed its claws grab a victim's head. This poor person's head completely disappeared in its grasp. A white substance began emitting from almost every pore of his victim. The demon began consuming it through its large, elephant-like trunk. I recognized it. It was the statue from the hidden room. I watched for a seemingly endless amount of time as it went from person to person, darting back and forth randomly, feeding. It was my turn. Its face was larger than ever as it stared at me. It grasped my head as I began to feel myself once again pass out. I awoke in a dark room. A soft red hue lit the bottom part of the walls. I was flat on my back. I lifted my head up to see the smoldering flames. It was the same fire from before. Confusion set in as I lifted my hand. I was holding a small branch with berries growing from it. I was reminded of the ritual I had witnessed earlier. My confusion turned to fright as I realized who was laying next to me. I jumped to my feet to see a young Asian man, peacefully laying on his back as well, a dagger deep in his chest. Police were notified and an investigation was done. I told them my whole story top to bottom, except for the dream. You are officially the first to hear that, as I kept it myself for so long. The detectives were able to identify the man who attacked me. He was the child of a Japanese worker who had died in the accident all those decades ago. They thought his attack on me may have been revenge for his father or, possibly, the same psychosis everyone in town was experiencing. My conclusions fall down a different path. Do you remember the words he yelled to me? Fukushu and Raku? They were also inscribed on that little shrine he had. Fukushu means revenge. Raku. That's a far different meaning. Raku is an ancient Japanese demon who is benevolent in nature and devours nightmares when you call on it. I believe the old folklore was incorrect, and so did this young man. It wasn't after our nightmares, it was after our dreams, and that's exactly what it got.